Hi, fellow travelers. My name is Martin Desmond. I've been to Yellowstone National Park many times over the course of my life, most recently in May of 2025. In this video, what I'm going to discuss is how you can save hundreds, if not $1,000 or more, while staying in the Old Faithful area. You don't want to be like the couple who drove up from Salt Lake City who were checking in ahead of me at the Old Faithful Lodge. They hadn't made any arrangements for a reservation. Even though this was May 9th, Old Faithful Lodge was already all filled up, as well as the Old Faithful Inn and the Snow Lodge. Now, luckily for this couple, the Xanterra employee was able to find them lodging at a companion facility up in Mammoth, but that was a 50-mile drive for them. Here we are, we're walking up to Old Faithful Inn. This inn was originally built back in 1903 to 1904. There's been a couple of additions to the building over the years. There's 329 rooms in the building, and at least for 2025, it opened on May 2nd and will be open through October 13th. Here we are, we're walking through the famous red doors into the famous lobby. This particular log hostelry, which is the largest in the world, it's 5 stories tall. We're up here on the second floor now, looking down. That's a line going into the dinner buffet, and you also on the left-hand side see the fireplace. And actually, what's nice about this fireplace is they actually burn real wood. Now here we're walking up on the second floor. We just simply walked past the opening to the dinner. A lot of people like to hang out here during the day and certainly in the evening and just simply look at all the activity that's going on in this lobby. It's really quite active. There's at the facility. There's a large restaurant. There's a lounge. There's a deli. There's also over here on the left-hand side, you can get mixed drinks and a beer. Here, what we're doing right now is we're walking into the older part of Old Faithful Inn. Many of these rooms don't have baths, but at least one of the things is that these are the lowest cost ones, and as we'll see in a little bit, they are the cheapest. There's all types of rooms here, from presidential suites to junior suites. Another thing that's nice about Old Faithful Inn is there's music both during the day and in the evening. Now, to make arrangements, what you want to do is you want to go to YellowstoneParkLodges.com. Xanterra is a pretty large company and it manages all the lodging facilities in Yellowstone. And as you can see over on the left-hand side, you'll click on which of the facilities, or you can select all of them to stay at, and then enter in the month that you want to stay, or you can put in specific dates for that though. And I generally recommend that you start planning 6 to 8 months ahead of time because you want to look for deals, and deals do show up. So here we are, we're looking at July of 2025, and, for at least the Old Faithful Inn, it's like on July 3rd, one of the old rooms is 267, but then you notice that the lowest prices after that are 545, 638, 586. So the prices jump up quite a bit. And then you also notice on the other side, the Old Faithful Snow Lodge, where the room is the lowest cost room is 493. And then Old Faithful Lodging, there's one entry on July 2nd for 137, and where all the yellow X's are, those are all filled up. So here we are. hardly any spaces available in Old Faithful itself. And so it says that we start to drill down through their website on a particular day. So on this particular day, there's still a couple of rooms available in the old house. Now, in the old house, most of these generally don't have bathrooms, which is why you do get some savings there. And so, for example, like the one queen, no bath, 267, the three queen, no bath, 287. So now we're looking at the month activity. And so as you can see, the first week and a half or so, there's still availability. But then during the middle of the month, there's no availability. And then there starts to get some availability again at the end of the month. But it gives you an example of how things fill up. Now we're looking at a hotel room here, and once again you notice the price has really jumped up quite a bit. Once again, depending on the day, $639. And then you notice that at the end of September, that's when the activity is starting to drop off. And so the price of the rooms has dropped down to like 371. So a bit of savings there. And so once again, this is where you really need to plan out ahead and when you're and figure out what's the best time for you to visit, particularly if you have a fairly flexible schedule. The second facility in the Old Faithful area is the Snow Lodge. Now, we're actually looking at the main entrance, even though most people actually go through the side entrance. And Snow Lodge was originally built back in 1999. There's 134 both hotel rooms as well as Western and Frontier cabins. So here we're walking down the main lobby. We've just passed the restaurant, and they also have a separate lounge, and we're coming up on the bathrooms. Now, the one outstanding feature of the Snow Lodge is that they actually have Wi-Fi access. There's no Wi-Fi access either at the Old Faithful Inn or the Old Faithful Lodge. Nevertheless, if you're staying at the Old Faithful Inn or the Lodge, you can get access to the Wi-Fi coverage here. And that's the main desk that we just swept by. And here we're walking down the first floor at the Snow Lodge, and as you can see, this just sort of looks like a typical, relatively uh, new hotel motel room. Nothing really fancy about it. And so once again, we're walking back here into the main lodge, and these chairs actually get filled up pretty quickly because people are always wanting to check their smartphone for what's happening. So now we're walking out to the Snow Lodge, Pioneer, and Frontier cabins. Now, my wife and I have actually never stayed at these. Generally, because I'm such a cheapskate, I generally just simply stay over at Old Faithful Lodge, even though we have stayed at Old Faithful Inn. Here we're walking into the Geyser Grill at the Snow Lodge. And what I typically will do is I will uh, go over to the Old Faithful Inn, sometimes to the Snow Lodge, and get a breakfast buffet. And at least in 2025, the cost of that is 2025. Most of the food in Yellowstone, not surprisingly, it's not high quality. Um, what I did here at the Geyser Grill for a couple of lunches is I would order a hamburger for $8.50 and then French fries. Surprisingly, the French fries weren't too bad. So the cost of that lunch there is about $16 for me. So, but then another thing I like to do is just get out my backpacking stove and boil up some water and then have some freeze-dried noodles or beef stroganoff. So here we're looking at prices for the Snow Lodge in August of 2025. And as you can see, the prices are actually, at least, by my standards, pretty high, 493, 535. And once again, you'd have to drill down, see whether this is a room or if it's one of the Pioneer or Frontier cabins, though. So and then also to the left, you can see that there was hardly any availability for Old Faithful Lodge. So, like in this particular case, as you drill down, so there's a deluxe room, two queen for $493. Now you don't have any TV in here. You generally have to go down to the lobby to get internet access. I mean, at least you do have a bathroom, but you don't have any air conditioning. So I mean, this is just pretty basic, even though it was originally built back in 20 or 1999. And what you may notice from time to time is Antero will list certain specials. So here we are, like at the end of October, and they're reducing the price on the Lake Lodge cabins. You'll notice that the prices for the Old Faithful Snow Lodge, they've also come down some at the end of or at the beginning of October. So here we're approaching Old Faithful Lodge. Now, this lodge was originally built back in the 1920s. There's about 100 cabins here in the lodge. Actually, the irony is the lodge actually has the best view of Old Faithful Geyser, which is actually just off to the immediate left. It's off about 80 to 100 yards. This is where my spouse and I typically stay when we're here in the Old Faithful area, just simply because the rooms are just much more budget friendly, and I'll show you what the prices were. So now we're approaching the main entrance to Old Faithful Lodge, and we're about to go through the door. And you notice there's a lot of outdoor seating areas for everybody to watch. Off to your right-hand side is the main check-in lobby. And so now as we're walking down through the corridors, off here to the right is the gift shop, and then we're just sort of passing to the deli on the left. And then straight ahead of us is the cafeteria. Now, I myself didn't eat at the cafeteria, but so now as we turn, you know, uh, you can't quite see it, but Old Faithful Geyser is directly ahead of you. And one of the things I really encourage people to do is, you'll have hundreds, 500 people standing in front watching Old Faithful Geyser, but then there's about 2.5, 3 miles of trails. And I would just anecdotally say that for every 100 people that look at the geyser, only 5 or 10 of them, maybe 15, actually bother to walk down the other trails. So here we're approaching my cabin. It was just sort of by pure luck, but you might, if you do decide to stay at the lodge, you might try to put in a request. My particular cabin actually had a view of Old Faithful Geyser, and I didn't have to pay several $100 extra for that. So cabins 200, 201, and my cabin up here, 203. We actually have views of Old Faithful Geyser. I've seen the geyser many times over my life, though, so wasn't I that I went out of my way to try to get a view. So here's a look inside. Now, because I'm so cheap, I don't have a bathroom, and by deciding not to have a bathroom, I save about 80 or $90 because I was able to get this room for 133, and generally the ones with the bathrooms go for about $220. But this actually we do have one neighbor on the other side. It was actually pretty quiet, and as we get into these charts a little bit later, the irony is these cabins, although pretty modest, built back in the 1920s, they're actually the quietest place to stay here in Old Faithful area. And here we're just sort of walking down. You can see snow flurries, this being mid-May. It was certainly cold. We had snow flurries on a couple of the different days. And there's obviously there's bathrooms here, and there's also showers, and there's some you can also pick up ice, and they have a couple of recycling areas though. But as, as I said, this is where my spouse and I typically stay. So once again, we're going back here to July of 2025. As you can see, for the first 7 days in July, there's only one day that there's even any rooms available here at the Old Faithful Lodge. So you really want to plan ahead. And as I said, I started planning 6 to 8 months ahead. And what you can do is with Santerra, if you decide to stay for 4 or 5 days or whatever, you only have to pay for the first day at the time that you make that reservation. And so here's the actual prices that I paid, and I'll sort of move this over a little bit. But as you can see, I paid $133 for each of these days. Taxes are roughly about 15%. So for 5 days, my total was 767. Now, actually, I generated this out of Chat GBT. I have to confess, I intensely dislike AI, but at the same time, I'm also using AI. And so what it does is, I asked it to rank the Old Faithful Lodge and the Inn and the Snow Lodge. And of course, not surprisingly, for the price, Old Faithful Lodge comes in at the lowest. It also has an excellent view of the geyser, as I described. For Snow Lodge, it claims it has a limited view, but actually that's not true. It has absolutely no view whatsoever. And for certainly for the historical charm, it's impossible to beat the Old Faithful Inn. And then what is interesting is it does show that it's quieter there than the other two places. Now we have a different comparison here for historical charm, modern amenities. Certainly with the Old Faithful Snow Lodge, the reason why it comes out on top for the modern amenities is just simply because it has that Wi-Fi coverage that none of the others do. And although you can't see it, Old Faithful Lodge is actually has the closest proximity to the geyser and dining options. They rank the Snow Lodge higher than Old Faithful Inn, but I don't. Once again, I wouldn't agree with that, though. You can get a dinner there at both Old Faithful Inn and the Snow Lodge. The dinner buffets are $49.95, and as I mentioned earlier. You can get a breakfast buffet for $19.95. Those are obviously 2025 prices. And well, I didn't have any lunch buffets, nor did I have any dinner buffets, but the lunch buffet I think also costs like 26, 27. And you can also order a la carte there at the different cafeterias and restaurants there in the facility, though. So here's a comparison of 5 nights of lodging. And once again, unfortunately, what I did is I attempted to look at what would be the likely comparison. And so I compared the Old Faithful Inn for this also includes the taxes. So that was like 307. The Snow Lodge was 399. That's for the Western cabin, sort of a slight upgrade because that does have a bath. And then the Old Faithful Lodge, with no bath, a cabin. And so anyway, so the price for 5 days there, and I generally recommend that you spend at least 5 days there. So it's certainly much cheaper staying there. So finally, my next video is going to be on how Yellowstone wildlife pisses off tourists. So you want to click the subscribe button. So thank you for listening for this video.